What if it is, in fact, the questions that we ask that matter and not the answers? We've been indoctrinated as a culture into this notion that stories have beginnings and middles and ends, and that it is, in fact, the ends of the stories that are most important. In the 7 Billion Geniuses process that I present in this book, I rely a lot on ideas from narrative therapy, which is therapy that I use. It's actually infuses my life. It actually is my life. I think about my life in the context of these ideas all the time. And I've talked about the absent but implicit as kind of a foundational idea from narrative therapy. But narrative therapy is very much about questions and not about answers. And it throws the whole construction of knowledge on its head in that way, because it moves away from this notion that the most important thing that we carry around is a bunch of answers to questions, and says really that the most important thing that we can do is ask really good questions. And if you think about it as stepping stones, that the stepping stones are the places that the questions bring us, but if we stay connected to those stones, it's a kind of a prison. It's an extraordinarily limited way to live when we're offered the alternative of the space between the stones. And then the possibility that those stones aren't the only stones, that there are an infinite number of possible trajectories that we can take along a path that's ultimately constructed by the questions that we ask. And so there are two kind of fundamental questions that I'm interested in talking about today. One is why, and one is what do you mean by that? And anybody who's had a conversation with me of any kind of length will know that that those are questions that come up in the context of the conversation all the time, and they are what is known as open questions. They are questions that are fundamentally without an answer that I'm aware of. And I've said before, but I'll say it again, some of the most important questions that I can remember ever having asked anyone are the ones where there is absolutely no possibility in my mind of knowing the answer to the question that I've asked. And why is a great one. As a matter of fact, there are some schools of thought that suggest that why is a terrible question. I'm not really sure why that is, and haven't had the opportunity to really delve into that conversation with anybody who has that position. But it's not a position that I am connected to in any way. The why question creates a vast number of possibilities for response, and that may be why some people are concerned about it or worried about it. They're from a position of thinking that there needs to be some kind of sense of where all this is going. And again, for me, that's connected to a social indoctrination that suggests that there are supposed to be answers, and those supposed to be's are connected to something that's ultimately positive. For me, it's a kind of a prison, it's a kind of a limitation, and so it's not something that I'm connected to. And again, back to the previous video on curiosity, the what do you mean by that question has got to be asked from a position of genuine curiosity. Otherwise, it's invasive, it's destructive, it's confrontative. It's not intended to be a confrontation in any way. It's intended to be a side-by-side looking off into the distance going, geez, what is it that you mean by that? What could that possibly mean? And I'm actually going to turn the camera around just for a second. This is a place that I have the opportunity to experience on a daily basis. This is kind of my backyard. And if you think just for a second about looking off into this expanse that's in front of the camera right now, and think about it as a place of infinite possibilities. So you look off into this scene, and there's a variety of different ways that you can experience this scene. One is to say, well, there's a yurt there. That is a yurt, and there's trees, and there's a pond, and start to identify these things and suggest, some kind of fixed notion by those identifications. Or you could say, what is that? Because there's a million different ways that I can describe that yurt that aren't clear or sort of ending, or they're completely expansive, just in terms of my experience, not only of that yurt, but of these different trees and these bushes and this pile of wood over here, simply by somebody asking me questions about what these things are. And as we would get closer and closer to these different objects, we can continue to kind of truncate the meaning of these things by saying, oh, well, that's a that, and that's bark, and that's wood, and that's... Continue to name these things as a way to kind of, I don't know, try to have some kind of sense of what it all means. Or we could ask questions, well, you know, what about that trunk that means anything, or what's behind the trunk, or what's around the trunk, or how is that trunk connected to the tree that used to be there, and does it tell a story about this tree that used to be there, and where did that tree come from, and how did that tree end up being there, and how did any of this stuff end up being there? And so you see, is in the context of what I'm doing now, is I'm creating a far vaster sense of what this scene that you're looking at might be, what it might mean. And so in the process of kind of confronting my life, that's the sort of thing that I do. It's this ever-evolving sense of what is there, as opposed to constantly naming it and limiting it. And so in the context of these questions, why and what do you mean by that, it's the same process. The idea of why is that important to you, or where did this idea come from in your life, or when you say the word happy, what do you mean by that word happy? Because in the context of the answer to that question, what do you mean by the word happy, is a whole other story about happy that's connected to many other words that you could ask questions into. And so this idea of genuinely asking the question, what do you mean by happy, as opposed to what do you mean by happy, in a kind of a constricting way, a kind of an opening way of saying, geez, I'm really curious about what you mean by happy. It can just infinitely unfold into other descriptions that contribute to other descriptions, that include words that can create other descriptions, and this perpetually unfolding idea. And I think in some ways that may be really what we're up against, is this desire to kind of move away from some kind of description that's perpetually unfolding, as if there's some way that is not good, that it should be easier than that there should be limits on the way that we understand things, because that somehow serves us. And what I'm saying is that the idea of genius is not a limiting thing. It's a perpetually unfolding thing that encompasses the genius that's manifest in every single person, really every single thing on this planet. And that the way to discover it, or a way to discover it, to start to come to see it as it manifests in your life, is to ask these kinds of questions that create for the perpetual unfoldment of one's own experience of everything that we encounter on a daily basis, and that these experiences don't need to contribute to some kind of knowledges that we put away in a basket somewhere, that somehow are impressive to others or are supposed to be useful to us, but that they just create more possibilities for exploration. So to think about questions as things that just continue to open up possibilities, going and expanding the way of describing territories of our experience. These are the kinds of questions that I'm talking about, that we talk about in narrative work, but that I'm also talking about in the 7 Billion Geniuses process. So perpetually opening possibilities and expanding of our own experience of things that just create other experiences, that create other experiences. So these questions are very important to me, and I hope this was a useful description of the sorts of questions that one might use to encounter the experience, their life, who you are in a different way that's not limiting. So hope this was useful. You can see links about how to get in touch with me at the end of this video, and please do stay in touch.